Well, good morning, everybody. This is the Montana Mystery, Suspense, and Thrill panel with cookies included. Our panelists are, from left to right, Gwen Florio. She's a veteran journalist. She's covered stories ranging from the shootings at Columbine High School to the trial of Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh, to the glitz of the Miss America pageant and the more practical Miss Navajo contest, whose participants slaughter a sheep. She's reported from Afghanistan, Iraq, and Somalia, as well as Lost Springs, Wyoming, a population of 3. Her journalism has been nominated 3 times for the Pulitzer Prize and her short fiction for the Pushcart Prize. Keith McCafferty, in the middle here, and the baker, is the survival and outdoor skills editor of Field and Stream. He's written articles for publications as diverse as Fly Fisherman Magazine, Mother Earth News, Gray's Sporting Journal, and the Chicago Tribune, and on subjects ranging from mosquitoes to wolves to mercenaries and exorcism. He's based in Montana and works on assignment around the globe. He recently spent a month in India trekking the Himalayas. He's won numerous awards, including the Robert Traver Award for Angling Literature, and has twice been a finalist for the National Magazine Award. To my far right is Christine Carbo. Christine moved to Kalispell from Florida with her family when she was 12. She has her private pilot's license, and in the Sky theme, she's also worked as a flight attendant. Christine has her master's in English and linguistics and has taught English courses at Flathead Valley Community College. But she found that teaching as an adjunct at a community college was not enough income for a single mom, so she began writing part-time, doing technical writing, and that just didn't leave her any time to write creatively. Ultimately, breaking away from technical writing and opening her own Pilates studio afforded her the flexibility, no pun intended, to write creatively again. Writing has been an amazing journey for Christine. She finds that writing is even more fulfilling when she stays involved with other writers. She's a member of Sisters in Crime and the Mystery Writers of America, as well as other writers' groups. So I'm happy to introduce all of our panelists, and I know we'll enjoy it. And we have a handheld mic for you to pass.
Thank you. I'm going to read a little bit this morning from a book of mine coming out in March. That is the 4th book in my Lola Wicks series. Lola is a journalist who basically lives for chasing stories, not autobiographical in any way, although the privilege of being a fiction writer is I have made Lola younger and taller and thinner and smarter, far tougher than I. So, as I said, that's fun. In this particular book, she has her longtime partner, Charlie, after many years and a child, has finally persuaded her to marry him. And now his next task is to get her to go on a honeymoon. Lola's not a vacation person. She's not the most romantic woman in the world. She does have a child. So, and the way he gets her convinced to go away on this honeymoon is he says, he doesn't really bill it as a honeymoon. He says, we're going to visit my brother. His brother had married a Navajo woman, and they live on the Navajo reservation. He's like, I'm going to show you this beautiful part of the world. We'll see the Grand Canyon. He doesn't mention the H word. These books being what they are, things go quickly awry, as you'll see in this first chapter. And just go ahead and read now, or you want to?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. The day that would see Ben Yazzie transformed into shreds of flesh in too many evidence bags began with a rare, strong, and satisfying piss. Ben leaned back, I got to say piss in the first sentence. Ben leaned back against the stream, a veritable Niagara, not his usual dribble and hitch that put youth farther in the rearview mirror every day. He shook off with a flourish, tucked himself in, and returned to the bedroom with a regretful glance toward the empty bed. Mornings like this, he'd have woken his old woman with a proper tumble. Angelina, dead these 5 years now, liked a good frolicking right up to the end. He stood before the mirror, wound a wide red cloth band around his forehead to hold back his still black hair, slid the chunk of turquoise and silver high on his throat to fasten his bolo tie, and draped 3 strands of hand-rolled turquoise beads interspersed with coral around his neck. Silver bracelets weighed down his wrist, and rings adorned his fingers to the knuckles. They sported lumpy, old-fashioned turquoise nuggets, not the glossy plastic congested crap so often sold these days. He'd have worn them anyway, the jewelry his legacy from a silversmith grandfather. But there was the undeniable fact that tourists like their Indians to look the part. Ben gazed into the mirror. But for the grin on his face, he was looking at a living, breathing, colorized version of an Edward S. Curtis photo. He forced his mouth into severe submission. Part of looking the part was a stoic solemnity. In the kitchen, KTNN, the self-proclaimed voice of the Navajo Nation, filled the room with Dene language news, more and more of it these days about the unrest over the Conrad coal mine. The deal allowing the white man-owned mine on the reservation land had injected millions of dollars into Navajo and Hopi coffers for decades, but people increasingly contended that millions more were owed the tribes, and still others thought the mine shouldn't exist at all. It sucked water, already the most precious of commodities, from the land and returned it poison. Livestock died. People lived, but only by virtue of drinking bottled water. And now the mine wanted to expand. The newscaster reminded people that demonstrations against the development had edged close to violence the previous summer. Heavy police presence would likely accompany this new summer's protest, a fact omitted from the truncated English language version of the news that followed. No use scaring the tourists who, along with the mine, were the financial lifeblood of the Navajo Nation. So in the interest of keeping this brief, I'm just going to skip ahead. Ben has a stand, his family has land where there are dinosaur tracks, and he makes his living showing the dinosaur tracks to tourists. And they do this very ingenious thing where it's really hard to see the tracks, but they pour water into them. And once water fills the tracks, they leap into prominence, and it's quite nifty. So he drives out to the site, and he has set up his sign saying dinosaur tracks ahead with a Navajo guide. And it says free, but he gets tips. He patted his empty pockets in anticipation. Just around the bend, thankfully shielded from view by the leap of mesa, outsized machinery clanked and groaned at the mine, whose gleanings, despite a maybe Indian family in the billboard, mostly lit cities like Phoenix and Los Angeles. There's a big billboard advertising the mine here. Ben shot a middle finger at the billboard, his daily greeting, and set the umbrella aside, unscrewed his thermos for some coffee before the day got too hot. The earth shuddered beneath him. The umbrella gave a skip. Coffee leapt from the thermos. The ground buckled and blasted skyward, bits and pieces of Ben Yazi soaring high and pouring back down in an unseasonable rain of red. Poor Ben. This is what Lola's going to arrive to.
So I have one more thing to pass around, I forgot. So, although I do mostly the novel work now, for 37 years I wrote for Field and Stream magazine and lots of magazines. And so this was my day job. And I'm just going to pass this around. If you go to the bookmark, I was lucky enough to go to Cuba and write about Cuba this year. So. Sometimes I'll have, like pictures on the wall to prove that I actually had a life before becoming a novelist. Anyway, I'm not going to read very much at all. I'll tell you a tiny story, though, sort of partly the inspiration. So this is my 5th book. I write sort of the Sean Stranahan mystery series, and it's mostly set in the Madison Valley or in other areas in Montana. And some people have heard this story, but the scariest time, can you guys hear okay? This is sort of echoey, but the scariest time for a writer, or at least for me, is when you actually send the book in. Because then you're sending it to your publisher, in my case, who's also my editor at Penguin Books. And, she basically has the authority to tell me I just wasted, 8 or 9 months of my life. And so I sent the book in, And that very day, I drove to West Yellowstone to talk to people there at the public library. And I remember driving down to West Yellowstone from Bozeman, which is where I live, and thinking, well, you know, have I sort of overstated this case of the, you know, the plight of the Yellowstone bison, which I'm sure a lot of you know a great deal about it. But even with President Obama signing the Bison Legacy Act, which makes it our national mammal, the truth is, if you get outside of here, most people still don't know much about it or much about the issue. And I wanted to write a story that sort of wove around that issue. And one of the focuses of the book is that there's a buffalo jump in the Madison Valley. There are actually several, where a small herd of bison have actually fallen to their deaths. And I was thinking, you know, is this realistic? Did I really do this okay? Because I tried so hard and, you know, interviewed so many people, and it's been an issue that's been important to me for many years anyway. And so I was driving up over Tarhee Pass, if any of you know where that is, from Montana into Idaho, and that's about 10 miles outside West Yellowstone. And there's an old bull bison walking up the road past the Welcome to Idaho sign, which is ironic because, you know, he was no more welcome in Idaho than he was in Montana. And because he'd strayed outside that buffer zone drawn around the park, he wasn't going to be hazed back into the park at that point. In fact, he was going to be killed. And so he had sort of sealed his own fate. And I took a photograph of him and posted it on my website. But, you know, it was very sad because I knew he would be killed. And in fact, that old bull bison was shot by Montana Department of Livestock, Idaho Department of Livestock, the very next day, and covered up with a tarp as soon as they could get a tarp over him. But the Buffalo Field Campaign people actually got it on film. And I thought, well, you know, that old bull bison was headed directly to where I set my book. So I didn't think I really had overstated it at all. And I'm not going to read from that because I don't like to read longer things. So I'm going to read a tiny bit from Crazy Mountain Kiss. So this book came out a year ago, and I was lucky enough to win the Spur Award for Best Contemporary Western Fiction. And because you got to do things, this one just got on Oprah's list, so that's cool. So I'm just going to, what they do at Penguin sometimes is Cherie Newman said I'd invented this genre, you know, fly fishing noir. But the truth is, I don't have more than 2 or 3 scenes in the book about fishing. And they'll actually have a roundtable discussion at Penguin. I've actually seen the table where they'll decide whether I have one fishing scene too many or, you know. So my first book, I was told to get rid of 1 scene. My second book, I was told to add 2. So you learn to walk that fine line. And so this is an example of what I do maybe twice in a book. And the rest of the time, the books have nothing to do with fishing, or very little. And this is called The Kiss of Death. And I have to find glasses because I can't read it. I got it. And this is just like a paragraph, you know. It says, people fish for different reasons. They fish to shed the cataracts of age, to relive the thrill that was the dancing of a bobber as a sunfish nipped the worm, and that 30 years later is hearkened by the rising of a trout to a mayfly. They fish because a cast is a prayer for the believer and a hope for the heathen, and the more casts you make, the more likely your prayer will be answered or your hope be realized. And they fish because a fish is a miracle of nature, its fins as wondrous as the wings of a bird, and because you can touch the one but not the other. Though he could not have expressed it if asked the question, and there was no one around to ask along the stretch of the Madison he drove to the next morning, what Sean Stranahan fished for were a series of moments. The wings of caddisflies pulsed over the river like dust motes and shafts of sunlight when Stranahan's imitation vanished in a swirl. That was one moment. Another came when the trout leapt, and a third when the leader tippet snapped. Stranahan waded to the bank and sat down, consoling himself with the thought that a fish lost is still a moment caught, for the hollow feeling that is counterpoint to the elation upon netting a fish remains an essential touchstone of the sport. Or so he told himself. A trout will make a philosopher out of you, especially a big one. So that's that. Thanks.
So hi, my name is Christine Carbo, as you already know, but I am kind of a new author. I have 2 books out. My first book was called The Wild Inside, and my second book just came out at the end of May, early June. It's called Mortal Fall. Both of these books are set in Glacier National, or the crimes are committed in Glacier National Park, but the whole setting is kind of that whole area that I'm from, the Flathead Valley and Whitefish and Columbia Falls and the canyon going up to Glacier. And I've had a lot of fun writing these books because there actually is quite a bit of crime in the area. There's a lot of meth production and whatnot in the canyon leading to in areas like Coram and places like that. And so I've got to do some research and talk to the local law enforcement agencies around where I live, and also the park rangers, which do all the law enforcement in Glacier. However, I've created a fictional park police in Glacier for both of my books. I've taken liberties with that and just decided I would do that. So my first book features a lead detective from the Department of the Interior who's actually based out of Denver, and he comes to Glacier for a pretty serious crime that takes place there. However, Glacier is the last place he wants to be because when he was 14, he witnessed his father get attacked and killed by a grizzly bear while camping there one night. And so Glacier kind of becomes this antagonist for him while he's investigating the case. My second book, I had started writing before. Do you guys remember when the bride pushed her newlywed husband off of the near the loop or at the loop? I had already started writing a plot that involved somebody dying near the loop, and so I didn't steal that from that, but it was kind of convenient because I think it was in People magazine and whatnot that that happened near the loop. So the loop became very famous, and it's kind of a famous place anywhere. That hairpin curve, right, when you go up Logan Pass. And this book involves somebody who's died there who actually was a wolverine researcher for the park, which is actually a true thing that we had some wolverine studies that took place in the park for a number of years. And the park was a great place to study wolverines because it's untouched, there's no roads other than the main road going through and a few others there, and some trails that are cut. It's very untouched land, and so they're able to study the wolverines in a kind of a pristine setting where they can really figure out what their movement patterns are and not have them so affected by roads that are going through. So, so anyway, that was kind of fun to dive into that subject, sort of like Keith and the bison. And I think all of us would say we don't like to preach any of these topics, but it is kind of fun just to explore them through our writing. And so I'm going to read a section from Mortal Fall. It's a little longer than they wrote, so I apologize. It's actually one Cherie Newman picked out for me when I was on her show, and so I thought, well, if she picked it out, it must be okay to read. So here we go. This is after the body's been kind of found down below the loop, and so my main investigator, he's a male, so I don't get that problem with not yet anyway. My third book involves a female, but I was just at a panel at a conference in New Orleans where these guys were too, a conference called BoucherCon, and one of the panelists said that she wished she would have written her character different, color hair different from her, because everybody keeps thinking she looks exactly like her character and that it's her. And I don't have that problem because my character's male, so you'll just have to pretend I've got a male voice. The roar from the helicopter filled my ears and rattled my bones. Small green leaves, dust, and white feathery filament from the cottonwood trees flurried madly as the chopper hovered above, like a parent waiting impatiently for Ken and me to complete the long line retrieval. Bright orange ropes with carabiners and a litter, a metal basket used to place the body in, dangled above us. We'd already wrapped the corpse in fabric and placed it in a maroon body bag. I was still in shock after realizing it was Wolfie. If it hadn't been for his large frame and his distinct blonde, wavy locks that looked like they belonged on an adolescent and not a grown man, I wouldn't have had any recognition. Paul Wolfie Sedgwick was a biologist and one of the lead researchers of the Wolverine research team. He had been nicknamed Wolvie early on, but over the years the V had drifted to an F. It was easier to say Wolfie than Wolvie. Ken and I had been on the scene for over 3 hours, photographing the victim from all angles, inspecting rock crumbled away by the velocity of the body crashing against it, and skid marks from the sliding. I'd taken notes, and we'd tweezed samples from his clothes torn off by some of the more jagged rocks above, at least the ones we could climb to. We couldn't get to some of the higher points above that he'd potentially hit on the way down, presuming we had judged the launch point accurately. Joe had radioed down to us that they found a car in the Loop Trail parking area with a license registered to Paul Sedgwick. His ID was also in the glove box. Ken and I looked for evidence of suicide or foul play, but saw none. No note on him, no suspicious injuries that might have been from something other than a fall, like a ligature mark or a gunshot wound. But the coroner or pathologist would be able to look more closely. I couldn't wrap my head around the idea that a man with so much experience in the backcountry could fall this close to the loop, so near the main and only pass through the park. His team of Wolverine researchers had skied all over Glacier Park in the dead of winter in sub-zero temperatures and biting wind chill to set the mini log cabin traps used for baiting them. Wolverines were the least known and most elusive animals in the Northwest, and cunning and tenacious enough to run off a grizzly bear over a dead carcass with its long claws, sharp teeth, and badass attitude. Wolfie's team had trekked across large massifs, scaled monumental crags, rambled up high summits, and skied over iced-over lakes, tracking the creatures and looking for their dens, hoping to find clues about their behavior and how strong their population is after decades of being trapped in the Northwest. Ken and I divided the ravine into grids and searched for signs of the animal just in case Wolfie had tried to foolishly climb down to track one. We looked for the telltale triangular-shaped print made from the animal's 5 toes, which would splay out when its paws compressed into the dirt or mud, its sharp-pointed claws leading the way. We checked for scat, cylindrical pellets with fur, bones, and feathers from its scavenging. We found nothing along those lines other than Wolfie's other hiking boot nestled in some bushes lower down. Had this burly blonde man been so consumed in his research that he'd gotten careless and simply fallen to his death? Or had he been suicidal, drinking, or on drugs? I pictured Wolfie, his long, loose locks blowing in the mountain breeze, his wide grin, and his healthy, weathered, and ruddy skin. I couldn't conceive of any of those scenarios, but it was too soon to make assumptions. When the large metal hook from the helicopter finally reached the ground, Ken and I moved Wolfie carefully onto the metal litter, hooked up the 4 lines to the center catch, and signaled for the chopper to lower a bit more. When the hook came into reaching distance, I grabbed it and snapped the catch from the litter onto it and signaled for the pilot to rise. I watched the basket, hanging underneath the chopper like a fly in a spider's filament, swing away. Slowly, they'd take the body to a gravel pit near McDonald Creek, an opening used for construction vehicles where the coroner waited. I glanced up to Heaven's Peak again, then up Logan Pass to the panorama surrounding it. The crown of the continent stood massive and indifferent, beautiful and rugged, a place where time loses its significance and history shoots up out of the ground, its presence overwhelming and demanding, making you feel useless and small. The biologist trying to understand the near-mythical creature known for its toughness and resilience, but threatened by the loss of the glacial snowfields necessary for its winter dens, was now officially done with his research, officially done with his life, his family. The finality of it was every bit as humbling as the peaks towering above us. I thought of Laura, how our once rock-solid bond had slowly but surely crumbled, and felt a weight fall upon me like a heavy cloak. I undid the strap under my chin and moved my hard hat to get some air. My scalp was sweaty, the tips of my close-cropped hair gathered into wet points and clinging to the back of my neck and around my ears. For some reason, I suppose in homage, I held the helmet over my chest as if I were honoring the flag. I watched the chopper fly down the line of McDonald Creek, its dark strip of water flickering in sunlight and carving through the countryside at the base of Heaven's Peak. I watched it all the way until it grew very small, and its roar softened to a faint growl as it went around the bend toward the gravel pit 3 or 4 miles down the road. I put the hard hat back on and let out a groan in the silent contrast. "It's not going to be easy telling Wolfie's wife and kids," I said. "No," Ken agreed, "it's not."
So we just did fairly short things because we're more comfortable if you guys just ask us questions. We'll just pass it back and forth. So you got to ask something. Come on. All right.
I just so much appreciate your books. But anyway,
Thank you. She's not a plant one.
but the issues you bring to life, you know, and especially disgrace. And I wish everyone in Missoula would be in terms of what you reveal about sexual assault, and especially in light of what happened. So I just wonder how difficult it is for you to write a book like this. And how you...
That's interesting.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. The question is how I write about some fairly difficult issues in my books and how that affects me. Is that? Some of those scenes are hard to write. I tend to, with my books, as Christine said, we all tend to write about issues. You know, for me especially, I think that comes from my journalism background. And selfishly, with my novels, I write about issues I would like to write or have written about as a reporter. You know, for instance, the second one took place in the Bakken. My newspaper was never going to send me to the Bakken, so I wrote a book. But what's interesting is that as a journalist, people always accuse you of making stuff up. As a novelist, they think you're writing about yourself. So for instance, with Disgraced, I got a text in the middle of the night from a good friend that said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry those terrible things happened to you. Are you all right?" And I'm like, I made it up. You know, if those things had happened to me, I would be in Warm Springs. So there are scenes that are tough to write. I tend to write them through on one quick pass and edit them quickly and just get beyond them. But it's just, they're necessary given some of the subject matter that I write about.
Just to follow up on that, I wasn't really talking, much about that as given the weight and depth of the issue coming up in Missoula and what, some of the things that you cover in the book are so, a lot of people don't know and are so true, and I wish people did know, that somebody could look perfectly innocent.
Right.
Predator kind of thing. And I just so appreciated the reality of the amazing, realistic picture you painted.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. And the question was about just the reality of the fiction. And I do think most fiction and the best fiction, as someone said, fiction can be more true than reality. And fiction allows you to explore an issue with a kind of depth that most people won't talk about. So I like that freeing aspect of it.
Sure. What?
To what you're saying, how much of a balance do you try to strike between the facts and the drama?
Oh, okay. One of the strangest things about writing novels is you become obsessed with them. I started out as a newspaper journalist, a crime reporter, and then became a magazine writer, and finally became a novelist. And with the other two, you don't have time to, this is sort of answering your question, you don't have time to become obsessed with stuff because you're always on to the next thing. Gwen's on to the next thing every day, you know, and I used to be too. When you write a novel, that's 6 months or a year or more with one thing. And so you wake up in the middle of the night, that's all you think about. And every once in a while you step back and you realize that what you're obsessed about isn't even real. It isn't real. So that's I'm not even sure it's an altogether healthy, you know, pursuit in that regard. But like Gwen and Christine, you know, like when I write about the bison issue or wolves, I don't really feel like it's necessary to write about a theme which is sort of a factual theme. I seem to do it every other book. But then you do have to do research and, you know, make things as factual as you can. I got lucky. I'll be done here in a second. I got lucky because I set a scene on the Madison River with my last book at a mermaid bar. So I get a lot of readers who will say, well, is there really a mermaid bar there? I said, well, no, but there's a Piano Pat Spoonheim up there in Great Falls at the Sip and Dip. And all I did was take that bar 150 miles south or whatever. And so because that book had a lot of Native American characters or a few Native American characters, I wanted to run it by some, you know, Native American readers first, which I did. And this is one of those things like you can't make up. So I wrote about a mermaid who was part Chippewa Cree, part Blackfeet. Well, the woman I got to read my book, one of them, she's part Chippewa Cree and part Blackfeet, and she used to swim topless in the Sip and Dip. Because you see, anybody can jump in the Sip and Dip because it's actually just a hotel pool. So I basically wrote all about her life. I hadn't even met her at that point.
I think that also it is, I like author's notes because like when I apologize for creating my own park police right when I started talking, I do tend to make sure that people are clear on that. Like I know what I'm doing. I know I'm taking creative license here, and I like to let people know either in my acknowledgments or some kind of author's note that, you know, this is, you know, I'm not trying to completely steal from the Wolverine studies. They did take place such and such time. And I mean, these little author's notes or acknowledgments that you can write in books are helpful that way, and they go a long way in terms of credibility, because I think fans do get angry if you really, really botch a place. Or, you know, I know there's a gal who writes some fiction that's set in Montana, and there's a state police, and there's no note that, hey, I know there's no state police, but I mean, she's a beautiful writer, but I think some people I've looked at some of the reviews, and people are really angry about, like, you're not from Montana if you don't know there's not a state police. So I think it is important to try and be a little bit accurate or mostly accurate, and then if you're not going to be true to it, let your readers know that you're aware and that you're taking creative license. But it is fiction, and we're making stuff up for sure. I mean, I've got a grizzly bear in a compound in West Glacier being held to try and get some evidence out of him, and they don't want to kill him because he's a federal bear, and then they need to get a slug, and they're waiting until he poops, basically. And so it's like, you know, this is fiction. Any other questions? I have a question. Do you guys find, like, okay, as a Montanan, I love to hike and just be, you know, and you obviously love to fish and camp and be out in the woods. And I feel like since I've started doing these books, I have not had the time. And I'm wondering how you guys manage that.
Yeah, you end up fishing vicariously through your friends.
And your character.
And your characters. That's absolutely true. Because like my last book came out June 28th, and I have been on the road more or less constantly until October 17th. With one exception, I'm supposed to backpack into bow hunt elk tomorrow morning with my son. I don't even carry a bow. I'm just the Sherpa. But so no, I don't get to do very much anymore. I wish I could, but I don't.
It's called book research, and I very selfishly set my books in places where I'd really like to go. This one that's coming up is set on the Navajo reservation, which made me a little intimidated, Anne. But I love it down there. I had not been in many years, and so we went and spent like a week down there camping in Monument Valley. We woke up every morning and looked at those beautiful buttes and for work. So that's how I do it, but it is I have not been to Glacier this year, which makes me want to kill myself. But it's either I spend a weekend up in Glacier, and a weekend is like the barest minimum, or I get a whole lot done on the book, and I have a deadline coming up. So, yeah, I think one of the reasons all of our books are maybe so evocative of the outdoors is we're writing where we wish we were at that moment.
So, for each of you, when you start writing a book, do you know how it's going to end, or does the ending and plot evolve over the writing?
All right. Well, I'm what my agent calls a muddler-througher, which means that I have an idea for the first scene, and I may have a theme. Like I knew in the Buffalo Jump Blues I wanted to start the book with Buffalo and with a character named Harold, and I knew I wanted to end the book with those two, with the Buffalo and with Harold. But as a general rule, I just have, the first 20 pages and nothing. Well, I often have an idea at the end, and I have absolutely nothing in between. So I've always said, and I've always think that one of the main skills is being able to ignore the voices in your head that are telling you it's just not working, it's terrible. And the voices are in your head, but they're also in other people's mouths. I traded a job where they tell you it's hard to make a living for one where they assure you it's impossible. So I feel like if you can just bundle your way through to the end, then something's down there, and it's never as bad as what you think it is, and at least you can start working at that point.
I'm very similar. I kind of write as far as the headlights, and I in the first book I had a vague idea of the ending. In my second book, I think I kind of had a vague idea of the ending as well, but nothing in between. So it's kind of like E.L. Doctorow has a quote that you can, I'll butcher the quote, but you can drive at night and know where you're going, or you can drive at night and make it by as far as the headlights. And so I think a lot of us write that way. But for me, I kind of need to know, am I heading northwest or south, or is it, like, where's my final point? And so with the first two books, I had to get a little bit of a glimpse of what that final point was so that I could write toward it, even though I didn't know what was going to happen in between. I just wrote a third book that I turned in to my editor at Atria Books, and I just didn't know what I was going to do with the ending at all. And it was a very, very painful book for me to write because I didn't know if I was going to Alaska or California or, the East, West, wherever. And so I was writing as far as the headlights, but I had no idea. And that was a painful process. And for my fourth book, I really would like to know what my ending is, but I don't know that yet.
And likewise, yeah, we're quite the trio up here. The other term for muddler-thrower is pantser, i.e. by the seat of your pants, and I think I am a quintessential pantser. I do know, I usually start with place. Again, that's that where do I want to go next? And then what would happen in a place like this that would require my protagonist to step in? I know the beginning. I usually have a pretty clear idea of the end, which only leaves 300-some pages of absolute white space to fill, and it is just terrifying. And like Keith said, the constant drumbeat in your head of this is just crap, day after day after day, is really, there are days I'll sit down and I'm just like, no, don't make me do this again. But then, as he said, you'll go back. You can't edit a blank page. So getting that first draft done is wonderful. And then you go back and you'll read it and you think, this isn't so bad, this little part here, and you can expand that little part. There's got to be a better way. I know people who make long, long outlines and then just write to the outline. I think I would die of boredom if I did that because I would know what happens. And once in a blue moon in this long pantsing process, I come up with kind of a good thing to happen. And for 5 minutes, it's wonderful. So.
What do you guys do when you, and maybe this doesn't happen to you, but if you reach the point where you just feel kind of stuck, I don't want to use the words writer's block, but when you reach that point where you kind of need a little more, something else to get your batteries charged.
All right, yeah, because, that's, I found the last 2 books I've done, including the one I'm writing about, I'll get to a point about 3/4 of the way through, or maybe even 5/6 of the way through, and I really feel like I'm beating my head against a wall. So I go back to the beginning then, and then I rewrite it all, and hopefully in that, then I'll be able to sort of punch through and continue. And that's worked for me twice. It might work again, I don't know.
Well, there's different kinds of stuck. For me, there's the stuck in the middle of a manuscript like Keith just mentioned, and I find the same thing works. I call it like a cattle drive, bringing up the rear, like go back and just start editing that, and eventually you'll get some kind of rhythm going, and then it seems like you're less stuck when you get to the point that you left off at. I know a lot of writers who write, the next couple sentences of the next scene, and then they just leave it so that they have always direction when they come back to it. I don't do that because I'm not disciplined enough. And I'm also still new enough of a writer where I feel like I am experimenting, and so my stuck point right now is in between books. Okay, now I have to write I just finished my 3rd, I have to write a 4th. I don't feel like I'm an idea bin. Like I will talk to other writers who I have a friend who's just like idea. It's like, oh my God, you should go live in Hollywood and go do these TV shows because she's just constantly coming up with ideas. That's not me. I feel like I have to find a pearl. That takes a long time. And so I get a little nervous when you have a deadline ahead. I'm sure you felt this. You've got a deadline ahead and you haven't found your pearl yet and you're getting nervous, and then it's harder to find the pearl because you're nervous. And it's really hard when you're thinking through fuzz and static that's created by stress for a really good idea. So coming up with a plot, a good premise is a difficult thing, and one you don't take it lightly. If you have to spend 300-400 pages with a premise, you want it to work for you and you want it to be good. And so I think I put a lot of emphasis on that. So I don't know, pray, hope something comes, the muse. Come on, muse, work for me. Am I not getting enough sleep? Should I go hiking? Should I?
You should always go hiking. It does help. Yeah, it does. Movement helps a ton. I do think one thing that's at work here is that I used to think in journalism I would get to a point where I could just kind of coast because I'd be so good at it. Yeah, that never happened. But I also think in fiction, you set the bar higher for yourself with each one. You want, a friend of mine just said, actually, I think it was you, who said a book a year and each year a better book. And I love that. I have, whether you said it or not, it's my mantra. So that pressure to make the next book better is there. But what I do when I get stuck is I think I just write a lot of crap. I just sort of keep typing, and then eventually I type something good and I throw all of that crap out. I probably waste a lot of time and pages, but Ann Patchett had a wonderful analogy for writing, and she likened it to the moving sidewalks in the airport. You're in the airport, you're dragging your bag, you're in Minneapolis, so it's forever from gate to the next. And it's like, and then you hit the moving sidewalk, and for blissful seconds, everything is great, and you're writing beautifully. Then you hit the end of the moving sidewalk.
That's really, I'm glad she said that, because something I can do if I get really stuck is if I get certain characters on the page together, not just any two, but two that talk more easily, then I can get going again. But I write on the run, so what I do is I've got a little half a notebook in one sock and a pen in the other, and I run 3 times a week, about 4 miles, and I don't think of anything for half a mile, and then by the time I come back, I've written down 3 or 4 pages, and plus good excuse to stop. But that really works for me, and maybe it's just because I'm getting older. The blood goes through your brain a little bit better when you're running. It doesn't work if you're hiking or anything, but go ahead.
I just want to tell you that I appreciate your books because they always come out before my brother's birthday, so. Fisherman, and I always read them first.
Well, the truth is, the majority of my books are not read by people who have the slightest interest in fishing.
No, but he loves them. I appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to reading your book. So I just love Montana Mystery. So.
Great, we need a whole bunch of you. Are we done? Oh. Yeah, go ahead.
I find it easy with kicking around murder mystery plots in my head. I find it easy to murder somebody in creative ways.
Yeah.
I just can't figure out who the hell did it.
Well, we were all at this BoucherCon conference just last week in New Orleans, and there's a woman walking around passing out cards, and she calls herself the Poison Lady. Did you see that? Well, and so she doesn't ask for any money, but she will give you 1,000 different creative ways to kill somebody, and all she wants is acknowledgement in books. And she said she's been in like 80 books now. I don't know whether to believe her, but.
And I've found that it's easy to kill someone, and it's really fun when it's a creative way. The problem I run into is killing someone in a way that would not make it immediately apparent who did it. Most crimes, it's pretty obvious. And it's actually, as I'm writing these things, it's really hard to get away with murder. You need someone who can get away with it for the length of a book, and that's problematic. I'm not as evil a person as I would like to be.
So anybody else? Go ahead.
If murder is what you're doing, are you admitting somebody that you don't like?
Oh, I got it. All right. I met Ann Perry once. Do you know who Ann Perry is? And you know what she's famous for? For murdering her best friend's mother. And I met her, and I didn't know who she was. My friend Barbara Peters introduced us. And she said, and this was like a year after that, she said, you're going to be sleeping in the bed she slept in last night at her house, and all I knew is there's something odd about her. And then, of course, I realized, well, that's one place that I can't go, at least yet, because so far I haven't murdered anybody. But she speaks from a place of experience, comparatively.
Well, I've always thought that if I was going to murder somebody, it would be really a pleasure to envision somebody that I really think is capable. Worth not.
But
necessarily. What's the A is that craft?
Sue Graff.
I think I heard that she, her first number of books, she just envisioned her ex-husband.
I think one of the problems is you'd like your victim to be sympathetic so that people people feel invested in finding out who did this terrible thing to this nice person. So I always feel a little apologetic to I'm like, I'm sorry I've got to do this to you, but you're gone. Once in a blue moon, I've gotten to kill somebody bad, and I take inordinate pleasure in writing those scenes. And I usually make them a little more creative is because, man, you really have got this coming to you. So.
Well, I tend to write more about people who may do bad or evil things, but who are not inherently bad or evil, but are driven to that. And rather than just cardboard cutout bad guys. But I also will, draw from experience trying to come up with, like, one of my books, Crazy Mountain Kiss. I used to be a crime reporter in Bakersfield, California, of all places. And just down the street from me, a man and a woman, they were both in their 40s, both professional people. So I should have known better. But they were having difficulties, and he wouldn't answer the door. So she said, "I know you're in there." And she crawled down the chimney to confront him. And he was gone, and he didn't come back for 3 days, and she was dead in the chimney. And so that was a statewide story, and later a friend of mine who wrote the story in Bakersfield was visiting here in Montana just before he died, actually. He had cancer. And he told me that story, and I thought, okay, I'll use that. And then I sent him the very first draft of the book because I knew he wasn't going to be around, when the book was published. But sometimes you just got gifts like that, or like Christine has the woman who pushed her boyfriend, her new husband, over the precipice. Go ahead.
Question about recurring characters. For those of you who have a prime character that you deal with in all of your books, do you ever regret having created that character because now you feel wedded to having that character continue on his or her adventure?
Not for me, because I was a magazine writer for years, and I wrote so many magazine articles. I think if you look at the February 2008 issue of Film Stream, I have 8 articles in it. And I was sort of burned out, and so what I wanted to do was create a cast of characters that I thought I would like to hang around with. So I had that idea from the beginning. And so the only balance you have to reintroduce characters, but not too much, because a lot of people have read prior books and other people haven't.
Yeah, I actually like it, and I thought I would not. The challenge is your character has to grow and evolve, or they are just sort of stick figures. I made mine, Lola's kind of cranky and not the nicest person in the world, and I dearly enjoy torturing her. I put her in these horrible situations that force her to become her better self, frequently much against her will. And I think that's how I amuse myself, is being mean to Lola, and then Lola, see if she rallies or not. She does not always rally. And also, I gave her a child, because boy, will that challenge you. And that's really been fun, is writing her interaction with her child. And what I pray is that this series will continue until her child is a teenage girl. And then we'll see if she can just handle that.
So what I did was, in The Wild Inside, I feel like I played the character arc completely out, and so I don't continue on with him. But what I did was I plucked a character. There's a guy from the park police there in Glacier who assisted him with the crime, and I went to his point of view that I just read to you for this book. And so I'm kind of just piggybacking. And then so the third book I just read, I picked a female character that's actually in both of these books. She's a forensic scientist, and I use her in the third book. But I actually have 2 book point of views in the third book, and I continued on with this guy a little bit more in the third book as well. And so far that's really worked for me, because I don't get bored at all. I get to completely play out a new character arc, but they're still kind of familiar because I've been introduced to them by myself in the earlier book, and readers have been introduced to them, so it doesn't feel, I don't think, like I'm completely starting out with somebody that I haven't met. So there's a little familiarity, but kind of a whole new character arc, which is fun. Elizabeth George does this, a ton of French does it. It's not new, but it's fun.
Well, Gwen said she gave her character a child, but that's inherently dangerous. The reason so many characters in novels are single is it's not because sexual interest or romance dies when you give your character a husband or a wife. It's because you have to deal with the very fact that they're there. And if they're not part of the story, then they drag it down. And it's the same thing with a dog or a pet. You know, it's like, I thought I'd give my character a dog. Every single man in Montana has a dog. But then where's the damn dog, you know? It's like, you got to deal with it all the time. It's like, I'll write in the margin, where's the damn dog? Right? It's got to be somewhere. So that's Robert Parker, you know, Robert Parker wrote the Spencer series, and he made his girlfriend, Susan Silverman or whatever, a psychologist or a psychiatrist. And that was a way he could keep her involved in the stories, you know, without, you know, it was a way to justify her existence, in other words. So, strange, those are the kind of things you learn as you go along.
And there was a really interesting panel at BoucherCon about sex and mysteries. And, you know, I have to consciously put it in my books. I think these are adult people. They're probably going to have sex. Hey, there's that kid. Somebody had sex. But it's really difficult because a mystery is such a propulsive form that, you know, it picks up speed as you're going along. And if somebody stops to have sex, it slows it down. And so it's actually really difficult to build it in a way that is not gratuitous. I mean, that's always the problem, I think, with that. But that doesn't mess with the plot, that's germane to the plot. It's, yeah, it's just as problematic in fiction as it is in real life.
Well, you know, one of the people sitting with you is Ann Hillerman over there. You know, Ann took over her father's series. And she said that she took over a PG-rated series, and I know she wants to do, you know, more things. And she's going to have to deal with that sooner or later. Anyway.
Great questions.
Yeah, you guys, thanks a lot.